In recent years, there has been a race in the ball python breeding world to stack as many different recessive genes as possible into an individual animal. But there is a sleeping giant within the ball python breeding hobby, and this specific project isn't a recessive project. But when you look at the super forms of this specific complex, they actually outperform the base recessive genes that are forming the backbone of the multi-recessive race. So for this specific video, what we want to do is we want to go over the why this is happening, and we want to highlight some of the absolutely leading edge amazing combos that I guarantee will make this specific project one of the must-haves in the years to come. So for this week's video, we are going to be talking about the yellow belly complex, specifically the superforms. My name's Steven with Leviathan Snakes, and let's get to it. In order to understand why the yellow belly complex superforms are outperforming the base recessive morphs right now in the fall of 2024, we need to dive into the delicate balance between supply and demand of ball python projects. So let's say that we have a project and it is amazing. It doesn't really matter what gene it is, but the entire ball python breeding hobby knows that it is incredible and it will make every single project better that it is in. When this ends up happening, if there is too much hype that gets for one specific project at once, everybody goes in and starts gobbling up every little bit of supply that is available in that project. And as the demand outstrips the supply, the prices can go higher and higher and higher until there's a point where just about everybody who wants that morph has already bought it. But the very last people who were buying it at the very, very tallest, highest peak of prices. And then what happens is all of those people who bought in at the exact same point in time are raising up their animals. And in 2 to 3 years, when they're really able to produce animals in that specific project, there will be a massive increase of supply because everybody is all breeding it at once. And there isn't nearly as much demand for it anymore because everybody who wanted to get into that project already bought their animals. So what ends up happening is that the people who bought really high get panicked and they end up cutting their prices in order to try to sell their animals first, in order to try to recoup some of their investment. And ultimately this creates a really fast price crash because the specific morph, the specific project got too hot, too fast, and too many people jumped in all at once. This explanation is why I think that the yellow belly complex supers are outperforming the base recessive morphs right now, because everybody knows that the hype in the ball python world has been centered on multi-recessive projects, multi-recessive animals. And because the yellow belly complex isn't a recessive morph, it's an incomplete dominant morph, they have been viewed as spices to add into a multi-recessive project rather than the base of a project on its own. But when you are looking at the super forms of the yellow belly complex, whether this is super asphalt, super gravel, super spark, super spectre, so on and so forth, it can clearly see that they are amazing bases for other combos and other projects down the road. But again, because they are not classified as recessive, I think that they have been overlooked. While all of the other recessive morphs have been getting a ton of love and a ton of hype, there's also been a lot of supply created in them. So at this current point in time, if you are looking at the prices across the super forms of the yellow belly complex versus the homozygous forms of these base recessive morphs, the super forms of the yellow belly complex are actually holding a higher value than the recessive morphs when you are looking at just a super asphalt, super gravel, super spark, or super spectre compared to a clown, compared to a pied, compared to a DG, hypo, exanthic, ultramel. when we are looking at super asphalts with no other genes in them on Morph Market right now, the cheapest male available is $695, while the cheapest female available is $850. And then when you are comparing it to the base recessive morphs like Clown, Pied, DG, Hypo, Xanthic, and Ultramel, the most expensive of those right now on Morph Market is Ultramel, where the cheapest Ultramels are listed at $148 for a male and $184 for a female. And again, this is without any other genes in them because we need to make it as fair of a comparison as possible, and different genes can both add to value, but they can also subtract from the value. So by only comparing the super form to the homozygous form of the respective genes, it's easy to see that the super asphalt is outperforming all of them. But it doesn't end in just super asphalt when we're looking at super gravel. The cheapest super gravel male with no other genes in them right now on Morph Market is $245, while the cheapest super gravel female is $275, which again is about double the price of the most expensive homozygous form of the base recessive genes. Super Spark and Super Spectre are a little bit harder because neither one of them actually had a single gene, or I guess super form, of Spark or Spectre in the male side. But when looking at the female side, the cheapest one available on Morph Market right now for Super Spark was $250, and the cheapest one for Super Spectre was $258. So again, every single one of the yellow belly complex super forms are outperforming their comparable counterparts in the base recessives. Now, somebody might say that there is another super form that we're not discussing right now, and that is the ivory, because the yellow belly complex, yellow belly itself is the key piece here, and it does have a super form, but it's an all-white snake. So because of the fact that it's an all-white snake, it might be amazing for the pet side, but for the breeding side, it kind of limits your possibilities, and unless you're bringing in leopard, there's not a whole lot that you can do with just a ivory. So for that reason, I didn't really include it in here because most of the time when people are talking about the super forms of the yellow belly complex, they're not actually describing yellow belly in this specific scenario. So a couple stats that I thought were interesting about specifically super asphalt is that a super asphalt is about 9 times more valuable right now than a single gene clown, a single gene pied, or a single gene DG female, which I think is wild. Extrapolating on that, a super asphalt female is about 17 times more valuable than a hypo female. It's about 5.6 times more valuable than a VPI xanthic female, and it is about 4.6 times more valuable than an ultramel female. And as we're talking about all of these different morphs, it's very apparent that I'm not including things like sunset, puzzle, monsoon, zebra, things like this, because they are not really viewed as the bases for most projects. Instead, those are more higher end projects, and I didn't really think that it was a fair comparison to compare sunset to super gravel. And instead, I felt it was a much more fair comparison to compare super gravel to something like a clown, because both morphs have been around long enough to have their full price curve. Last little bit of stats before we jump into the animals that are leading the yellow belly complex superform projects is the average cost of a yellow belly complex super is $326.60, while the average base cost of one of the base recessives is $104.33. So again, this means that on average, the yellow belly complex superforms are worth about 3 times as much as a visual recessive gene, as long as it's one of those base recessives. my hypothesis on why the super forms of the yellow belly complex have held their values better and are currently at a higher price than the base recessives is because there hasn't been a flood of people trying to work the super forms of the yellow belly complex like there has been with the multi-recessive projects, where the byproducts are the single genes. So the misses in those multi-recessive races are going to be, let's say, a hypo pos het clown, and when it gets tested out through Rare Genetics Incorporated, who do shed testing on Morph Market and on Clutch, once they know that it's not a hypo 66% het clown, it's just a hypo, they end up selling that animal and it increases the supply of them to the point where the breeder doesn't really want them because they're not quite powerful enough to keep pushing their projects forward, and other people who are coming in aren't really paying attention to the single gene recessives unless they have some cool incomplete dominant combo genes in them, and instead they are overlooking just the base simple recessive animals. So this is a long way to say that there is a limited supply of the super forms of the yellow belly complex when you are comparing it to the homozygous forms of the base recessives. Just because something is scarce doesn't mean that it's automatically going to be valuable. And when we look at ball python genes, there are several examples of morphs that don't have very much supply, but there isn't a strong demand from the market, and therefore those projects, those animals, don't have high premiums on their prices. So when it comes to the ball python world, specifically the breeding world, the thing that I think influences the prices so much more than just scarcity is the appearance of the combos that that gene can make, not necessarily the gene itself. Because while we want animals and we want genes that are absolutely beautiful, the whole point of the ball python breeding hobby is putting different genetics together in order to make amazing, beautiful animals that have never existed before. So we want projects that have a lot of room where we can make a lot of really, really cool, amazing combos. I'm going to be showing up some pictures and highlighting some of the best super form animals that are right now leading the yellow belly complex projects. And the very first one that I have to show, and even though it's not a new combo, is the super asphalt clown. And I think that this animal is probably one of the prettiest clown combos, and it really only has 2 extra genes, which are 2 copies of asphalt. And this animal has such a drastic, wild appearance that I think gives it so much potential, so much room to make other amazing combos, but there's just not that many people making super asphalt clowns. But the second animal that I want to show off is this Inchy super asphalt clown, because I think that Inchy is a gene that a lot of people stay away from in the clown project because it reduces the pattern and it takes away some of the room that you can work future projects. But when you put Inchy with super asphalt and in clown, it's creating some really, really cool colors, some strong contrast, some strong pattern into the animal, and I think that it looks absolutely insane. Now, we want to do one more clown animal that we want to show off, but this one technically isn't a super form. Instead, it is an allelic combination between asphalt and yellow belly, and this, in my opinion, is a huge strength for this project because previous to genetic testing, people wanted to keep each specific line separate, so that way you knew that you had asphalt and you didn't have to worry about mixing it up with a gravel if you paired them together. But with genetic testing, with Rare Genetics Incorporated, now we can send in the sheds and figure out exactly what the animal is if we ever have a question. So we are no longer afraid of crossing an asphalt with a gravel or an asphalt with a yellow belly, because again, if we ever have a question about the babies, we can always shed test them and figure out exactly what gene it has. But I was going off on a tangent, and I want to show off this specific freeway clown combo because it blew me away, and it is a lace freeway clown, and I think it looks incredible. Again, it is about the combinations that we can create from these genes, and I think it is so clear why the super asphalt, why the super gravel, why the entire yellow belly complex supers and their allelic combinations still are holding so much value, because they are creating such amazing, beautiful animals. Moving away from clowns, and we want to look at some other recessives that are combined with the super form of the yellow belly complex, and I want to highlight this VPI exanthic super asphalt, because this boy is just incredible. He is insane, and he was produced by Will of RCR, and he is actually the product of androgenesis, which I think is really, really neat, because we've had parthenogenesis, but we've never had androgenesis, and the idea that a ball python can reproduce with only using the male DNA is really, really cool and really, really exciting. But anyways, regardless on that, this boy is absolutely insane, and it shows that there is a completely other direction that you can take the super form of the yellow belly complex that isn't limited to just clown. The last one that I want to highlight, and is my personal favorite of all of the super forms that I've seen in the yellow belly complex, is a super gravel ultramel, and this animal is so vibrantly orange. I think it is insane. I cannot wait to see what it looks like with other genes added into this animal, and I think that this animal is one of the best directions that you can go for both the yellow belly complex and for the ultramel project. In my opinion, these are some of the leading edge animals in the yellow belly complex. There are so many different combinations that haven't been made yet. There hasn't been a super form with the yellow belly complex with Sunset, with Monsoon, with Puzzle, with Zebra, and I think that those animals are going to be insane. They're going to be so cool, they're going to be so pretty. And there is nothing stopping somebody from treating the yellow belly complex as its own recessive in the race for multi-recessives, where instead of trying to do a DG exanthic clown, maybe you are trying to do a exanthic super asphalt clown, and it could be a new cool direction that is just as challenging, and in this specific situation, I think maybe even a little bit more valuable than something else that everybody else is going to be chasing. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you are interested in any of the babies that we've shown off in B-roll throughout this video, we have listed them on our Patreon, where if you sign up, every single dollar that you pay in Patreon fees can be used as a credit for a snake purchase, including one of these babies. So if you're interested in getting one, you might be able to check out the Patreon, see the weekly podcast, join in on the community, and get the snake for cheaper than you would have gotten it if you hadn't have joined. So we hope you guys enjoyed the video, and we will see you next week.